Hey everyone, hope you guys are having a great start to your day. Wanted to pop on and tell you a phrase that God spoke to me in my prayer time today that I really felt like was probably a word for a lot of people today. And the phrase was this: God can make something out of nothing in your personal life. God can make something out of nothing in your personal life. You know, I very much got the impression when I was praying for you guys this morning that there's a lot of people who they have been praying over some situations, really contending for some things, and they just haven't seen any movement in the natural. And I'm not just talking there's been like a little bit of stuff, but you know, it just doesn't seem like a lot. I'm talking it looks dead. I'm talking even your prayers feel like they're hitting a brick wall over some situations, and you're going, Lord, like, I know you spoke to me on this. Like, I know this is a promise. What on earth is going on with this particular thing? And it feels like there's no way out. It feels like there is zero movement on these different situations in your personal life. But I want to tell you guys, if there's anything that I've learned in my walk with God over the years, and I'm still learning, it's that God is able to move in the suddenly, and often he will in your personal life. And often it'll come out of left field and it'll look completely different from the way that you thought it would. A lot of times it'll be an option, quote unquote, that you couldn't have even dreamed up in your personal life because you didn't even know that that option existed. Amen. And so I just want to remind you guys that God is a God of the impossible, and you cannot go simply by what you are seeing in the natural to determine, quote unquote, whether or not God is moving on your behalf. You know, sometimes we will feel God's presence very strongly over something, and sometimes we will see how he's moving on things behind the scenes bit by bit over a circumstance, and I love those times. But sometimes you won't feel anything in your prayer times, and you're just being obedient to do what God has asked you to do. Sometimes you won't feel anything in the moments where, you know, it feels like something should be shifting in the natural. It feels like you should be seeing more progress. It feels like there should be more indicators that you're on the right path, right? And sometimes you just won't see that stuff. Amen. And so it's in those moments that you've got to know that God is the God of both. Amen. You know, sometimes he will allow us to feel his presence, to feel him, to see him moving very strongly over situations. But sometimes he doesn't. But it doesn't mean that he's not moving. It doesn't mean that he's not working on your behalf. It doesn't mean that your prayers aren't making an impact, ladies and gents. And God is able to come in often in an unexpected way and a suddenly way in your personal life, and to shift things in your moment to line up with his promises. And so I just wanted to pop on to encourage you guys with that today, that God can make something out of nothing in your personal life. And don't let the devil lie to you and tell you that just because you haven't seen anything in the natural yet, just because it doesn't feel like it's making a lot of progress, I want to tell you guys that doesn't necessarily mean that it isn't making progress in the spiritual realm. That doesn't mean that God isn't working and moving on behalf of things behind the scenes in your personal life. So don't give up in the place of prayer. The example that God brought me to is out of Exodus chapter 14, starting in verse 16. And it's talking about where Moses was instructed to lift up his rod and to part the Red Sea, basically, to tell the Red Sea to part, and God parted it, right? And so what was so interesting about that story is the Israelites felt like they were at, you know, the end of their rope. It's almost like, I'm sure that some of them might have even felt like God was messing with them a little bit. They were promised deliverance from Egypt. They had just gone through all of these awful plagues, right? There was a ton of warfare that they were experiencing in their personal life. And then, you know, they finally get free, and then poor little Israelites look behind them, and all of the Egyptians and Pharaoh are chasing them down, all of their families. And they're like, God, I thought you said, amen. I thought it looks completely impossible, God. It looks like there's no way out. There's literally just water in front of us, and there's an army behind us, God. You know, why would you bring us all of this way just to abandon us and to desert us? Why would you promise us a thing and then it be taken away from us just for us to be destroyed? And a lot of you guys are at that crossroads right now, where you feel like you've heard from God. You've gotten a little bit of deliverance maybe over a situation in your personal life, but now all of a sudden, out of nowhere, it looks completely opposite. It feels like you can't take ground, you can't have momentum in certain areas, and it looks just absolutely impossible. Amen. But I want to tell you guys, God is the God who moves in ways that we couldn't even pick up or, you know, imagine in the natural a lot of the time, because he's God. He's always got a way out. He's always got a way to pull you through to take you into that next thing in your personal life. And so God was like, oh, don't cry. Don't worry about it. We're just going to part the Red Sea. And I'm sure Moses was like, what? Right? And yet God was like, no, this is the way that we're going to get. We're going to part the Red Sea. You guys are going to walk through, and then I'm going to use the waters to consume Pharaoh and his army. So you're not going to have to worry about him ever again. And so I'm sure not one Israelite thought of that being the game plan, right? I'm sure there was not one of them that said, oh, guys, this is what God's going to do, right? Unless there was like a prophetic word that had gone forth before, right? They were probably pretty clueless that this was going to be a way of escape that God would put before them, right? And so I just want to tell you guys, God can make something out of nothing. Normally, in their own strength in the natural, these sweet little Israelites could not have pranced through the Red Sea like they did. Amen. But with God, all things are possible in your personal life. And if they had just looked at what was going on in the natural to dictate, whether or not they were going to get breakthrough, they would have been sorely disappointed, right? But because they were trusting in God, because God was leading the way, he waited until they got close to the Red Sea to tell it to part. Amen. And he delivered them in a supernatural way. And I want to tell you guys, God can still do the exact same thing in your personal life. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And the God that parted the Red Sea back then can part your circumstances today. You cannot depend on what you were seeing in the natural as an indication, a true indication of whether or not you were moving forward in your circumstances, because God can bring a different solution than you even knew was a possibility. He can bring us suddenly. He can bring it out of left field. He can do it in a moment, ladies and gents. So don't give up in the place of prayer today, and don't let what you were seeing in the natural determine what your actions should be in the spirit. You know what God has put on your heart, a lot of you guys. You know the things that he has spoken to you in the secret place. Amen. And I want to tell you guys and remind you guys today that it is so important that you hold on to those things, that you keep praying into those things, that you believe what God is showing you in your prayer times over these situations, because it matters more than you know, and he is faithful. Amen. Hope you guys have a great day. I'll chat with you again soon.